Alcatraz Island is home to one of the most famous prisons in history. But the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was not the first thing built on the island, and its history goes back farther than you might imagine. 10,000 years ago, the indigenous Miwok and Ohlone tribes were the first to occupy this area. They may have used the island for camping and fishing, but folklore says that if you did not follow tribal laws, you were banished here. It seems this island has held prisoners for much longer than we thought. By the time the Spanish explorers discovered the island in 1775, there were 10,000 indigenous around San Francisco Bay. On August 5, 1775, Lieutenant Juan Manuel de Ayala discovered the island and called it La Isla de los Alcatraces, meaning Island of the Seabirds. After the Mexican War had ended, California became the possession of the United States. The gold rush brought in so many people that the population of San Francisco went from 500 to 35,000 in 3 years. Because of all this happening, California was admitted to the Union and became a state in 1850. With so many ships coming into San Francisco Bay and its dangerous rocky coastline, the first lighthouse on the west coast was built on Alcatraz Island in 1854. Then in 1859, the U.S. Army believed that the bay was in danger from its enemies, and Fort Alcatraz was built. It was the largest fort west of the Mississippi River. A year later, though, the fort was less needed for protection and more used to house military prisoners. This continued until 1907, when the guns were removed from the fort and it became officially a military prison. In 1915, Fort Alcatraz was renamed Pacific Branch U.S. Disciplinary Barracks. This continued until the military prison closed its doors in 1933. The military turned over the prison to the Bureau of Prisons a year later, and Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary became the most famous prison in the world. Alcatraz was opened from 1934 to 1963 and only housed inmates that were transferred. No judge could sentence anyone to Alcatraz directly. Only the most difficult prisoners were sent to Alcatraz, as it housed people like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Birdman Robert Shroud. During its run, there were 14 escape attempts by 36 different prisoners in total. Of the escapees, 23 were caught, 6 were shot and killed, 2 drowned, and 5 were never heard from again. One such escape attempt was in May of 1946, when bank robber Bernard Paul Coy and 5 other men broke into the gun cage in cell box C to retrieve a guard's keys. That set did not have the key to get out of the prison, though, so these men took several guards hostage and killed 2 before the Marines were called in. 3 of the escapees became trapped in a utility passage and were killed by gunfire. This 2-day event became known as the Battle of Alcatraz, the bloodiest escape attempt in the prison's history. It was rumored that 3 of those 5 did manage to escape in 1962. It was partly because of this, and that it cost 3 times as much to house prisoners here than anywhere else, that then Attorney General Robert Kennedy ordered the prison to be closed in 1963. The last inmates left on March 21st of that year. On March 8, 1964, about 35 Native American activists occupied Alcatraz Island in protest of federal policies related to American Indians. This occupation lasted 4 hours. On November 20th, 1969, an organization calling themselves the United Indians of All Tribes claimed that after the federal government declared the island surplus federal property, that it should be returned to the indigenous people. Under the Treaty of Fort Laramie from 1868, it promised to return all retired, abandoned, or out-of-use federal lands to the native peoples for whom they were acquired. The United Indians of All Tribes demanded that the island's facilities be adapted, and new structures built for an Indian Education Center, Ecology Center, and Cultural Center. This occupation ended on June 11, 1971. During the 19-month occupation, several buildings were damaged or destroyed by fire, including the lighthouse keeper's home, the warden's home, the officers' club, the recreation hall, and the Coast Guard quarters. The cause of this fire is still under dispute. The U.S. government demolished a number of other buildings after the occupation had ended. These were mostly apartments. Graffiti from the period of Native American occupation is still visible at many locations on the island. In 1972, the National Park Service purchased Alcatraz Island and Fort Mason to establish the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. The island is still in operation as a tourist site and museum dedicated to its time as a federal penitentiary, but operating costs are still one of the biggest challenges today. While our biggest challenge is to review this location, we will determine if the inmates are still serving time in the afterlife, or if it's only the stories that remain.